This guy is a pathological psycho killer. There's no doubt about it.
The couple was picnicking, and here a man in a mask robbed, tied, and stabbed them, leaving them for dead. He got 83 cents.
Welcome to the Brothers in Crime podcast.
We are brothers.
We talk about true crime.
We don't take ourselves too seriously.
And you shouldn't either. Happy 4th of July, Bob.
It's still June.
Right, but when people listen to this, it'll actually be July 4th.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We got to record in advance. Well, then, happy 4 de Julio.
Okay. So I thought that it might be interesting today to talk about a case that took place on July 4th, specifically July 4th, 1969.
The summer of 69.
Yeah, you're like, what, 15, 16 then?
Yeah, something like that.
Now, enough about you. Let's talk about Darlene Ferrin and a friend of hers named Michael Mageau.
Okay, where are we at?
We're in Vallejo, California. Now, you always give me crap about the way I say names, so did I get Vallejo right? Is that how you say that?
I believe you did. You pronounced the J as an H. You're right on.
All right. Well, then we should just stop recording right now.
Right?
Okay. So Darlene was 22 years old. She was a daughter, a sister, a wife, and a mother. She checked all the boxes. She was born March 17th, 1947, and worked as a waitress at a place called Terry's. And this looked like the kind of food establishment that you and I would have hung out at, or at least eaten a few times if we were in Vallejo. She was a popular waitress there at this place named Terry's. Later on, it would become Rod's Hickory Pit, in case anybody's ever been out that way.
Oh, I like Terry's. Sounds much better.
Yeah, for sure. The restaurant, they changed it up a little bit. You can find some pictures of it when it's Rod's Hickory Pit, or at least I did. And pretty cool looking place. Now, while we're talking about this joint, it just so happens to be the place where Green Day played its first gig in October 1980, because the lead vocalist's mom was a waitress there.
No shit.
Yeah, you care to guess what it is now?
Oh,
It's going to piss you off.
a dispensary?
That's actually not a bad guess, but it's a Starbucks and a gas station.
Might as well be.
Oh, shoot. Okay, so Darlene, let's talk about her. She was friendly. Like I said, she had a reputation as being this very popular, just everybody liked her. She was very well liked in the community. People knew her. And she met her husband, Dean, at an IHOP in Vallejo in 1967. And in 69, Dean was a cook at another restaurant called Caesar's. So I don't know if they happened to meet there because they worked there. That's sort of what I've read. I don't know that to be a fact, but one way or another, they met at the IHOP.
Well, was she one-legged? Because only the one-legged waitresses work at IHOP.
Oh, that was bad. Okay, so Darlene was also previously married to a guy named James Phillips Crabtree. And just put that in the back of your brain. At Terry's, the diner where Darlene worked, she met this young guy named Mike Mageau. And he was born in October 1949. So in 1969, where we're talking about here on July 4th, Michael was 19 years old and Darlene was 22.
And she's already divorced or still married to some other dude?
She was once divorced and married to Dean now, and she and Dean have a kid who was not very old. I want to say in 69, I think the child was like maybe a year and a half or so old. And to my research, that child's still alive, so I'm just not even going to get into whether it's a boy or girl, what their name was, anything like that.
Okay, wait. So she's at 22. She's already divorced. She's on her second marriage, and now she's talking to Michael.
Yeah, and just put a pin in that because we're going to go a little further down that road here.
I'm not judging. I'm just saying that's a lot in a short period of time.
Wow, it's like you're getting ahead of me. Yeah, so they were coworkers and they were friends. And then on July 4th, 1969, Darlene picked Michael up at his house pretty late that night, like after 11. They're supposed to just be going out to eat, but Darlene told Michael she wanted to talk to him about something. So in her Chevy Corvair, Darlene drove the pair out to Blue Rock Springs Park in, is this Benicia? How would you say that?
Yeah, I guess.
All right. Well, if you're from there, I'm sure I just butchered it. So feel free to shout us out and tell us how you pronounce that. Now, this was an area that was popular with local teenagers who wanted to go cruising after dark.
All right. So she leaves Dean at home with the baby and went cruising with Michael to eat and talk
That's the story.
And they end up, they're going to the, this cruising after dark spot, which we all know what the hell that means.
Mm-hmm.
And she's in a Chevy Corvair. Did she not know Ralph Nader? I mean, she could have blown up any minute. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't think she was worried about that. Okay, I'll keep my opinions to myself. All right, so they get to the park, and Darlene turns off the car's headlights and the motor, but leaves the radio playing.
No, been there, done that.
It
doesn't work with these newfangled cars, though.
You went out on a drive with Darlene?
No, 69 was before my time. Otherwise, I'd have to say, I don't know.
Now, not long after Michael and Darlene got parked to talk, a few cars with some teenagers kind of came through, and you can imagine, right? It's July 4th, so we got some patriotic, red-blooded American youths laughing and yelling and throwing firecrackers. But they didn't really stay there. They just kind of rolled through. They were there for a minute or two, set off their firecrackers, and went on about their way.
Yeah, well, the 4th of July, anybody that works as a first responder, the 4th of July sucks.
I mean, Michael Strahan could talk about that, right? Isn't that the guy? Or no. No, I'm thinking of the wrong guy. Wrong New York Giant. It was Jason Pierre-Paul who blew off a bunch of his fingers a few 4th of Julys ago.
Yeah, well, that happens, but there's just chaos and mayhem. It's worse than Halloween.
Yeah. Well, there you go, folks. So just, be careful on the 4th of July, because you heard it from the man himself. Now, where am I at? Oh, I lost my spot.
You said they didn't stay long.
Yeah, so the kids roll out, right? So then you've got Michael and Darlene, and they're in this little parking lot in this park, and they're alone again till around midnight. And that's when another car pulls into the lot. And this one comes from, the direction of where Vallejo is. So I guess there's some different ways you can kind of come into this parking lot. They're coming from Vallejo. Now, there was only one man in the car, the driver, and he turned off the headlights and then pulled up next to Darlene's car, only about 6 or so feet away, which, that obviously would be annoying, but the reality is, whether it's going to eat in a restaurant and somebody sits at the table next to you, trying to use a urinal in the bathroom, and the guy comes in and uses the one beside you, even though there's 10 other ones, for whatever reason, this is just what people do.
Right. I don't get it.
I don't get it either, but people are weird. So this other car is a brownish color, and it looked like it could be a Ford Mustang or maybe a Chevy Corvair, just like Darlene's car. That's what the reports are.
So basically it was a car.
That's what I took away, because I was like, those are very different cars. I mean, I get if you're not a car person. Maybe you're just like, it's a car and you can't see me, but I'm just making a random shape. Yeah. Right. So
it was either a caravan or a pickup truck.
Right. Pretty much. So as this car idles next to them, Michael asked Darlene if she knew who the driver was. And she responded and just said, "Oh, never mind." Now, Michael wasn't sure what she meant by that, which he's not the first guy ever to be confused by something that a woman told him. But before he could ask for clarification, the car sped off the way it came from, back toward Vallejo. And I'm guessing that wasn't the most interesting thing for them to talk about anymore. And so a few minutes went by. And after about 5 minutes, the brown car came back. This time it pulled behind them and maybe a little bit to the right.
It's time to leave.
Of Darlene's Corvair. And it pulled in roughly about 10 feet behind them.
Unless she knows who it is, it's time to leave. But go ahead.
This is sound advice. You're not wrong. But, maybe they were distracted. I don't know. And I don't know. I really don't know. But I can just imagine in the situation, they might have been having a really interesting conversation. The headlights stayed on this time. And the driver got out of the car, and he had a bright light in his hand, and he was sort of holding it right about arm's length, and they couldn't make out his face because he was pointing the light directly at Darlene and Michael. He walked up to the passenger door of Darlene's car without saying a word. Based on the bright light and the approach, Michael thought the guy might be a cop, and so Michael was working on getting his ID out when the man raised a handgun and fired 5 shots through the window.
Oh, damn.
Michael was his first target. He was shot in the face and in his body. The distances were so close from where the shooting was occurring, though, that some of these projectiles went through Michael and also hit Darlene.
Holy shit.
Michael's in full-on fight or flight mode, and he was just trying to get away. He managed in this to get himself into the back seat, using his legs to kind of kick him over the front seat. But in doing this, he caught another bullet in his left knee. And that's when the shooter's focus changed. He fired at Darlene, hitting her in each arm and in the back as she turned away. The shooter began walking back toward his car when Michael, whether from just pain or an anger-fueled delirium, kind of yelled out. And when he did, the shooter stopped, turned around, went back, and fired 2 additional shots at each of the victims. And then he just turned around and calmly went back to his car.
Okay.
In terrible pain, but somehow still conscious, Michael managed to turn the car's flashers on in an attempt to just draw attention and get help. Like, to his credit, I mean, the guy, this is crazy what he's been through and how injured he is, but he manages to have the sort of awareness and thought process to do something. He opened his door on the passenger side and just fell out to the pavement. Laying on the ground, he watched the man who had just shot him and Darlene take off, driving back in the direction of Vallejo again. Now, several police cars and an ambulance, which, to your point, 4th of July, I'm sure they were like, here we go again. They soon arrived. And after other late-night teenage drivers had discovered Darlene's Corvair. So, thankfully, some passerbys and some good Samaritans found them, saw the flashers, saw what was going on, and got help there in a reasonably short period of time, I'll say. But unfortunately, despite the first responders' best efforts, it just wasn't enough to save Darlene. She didn't survive the ambulance ride that she took alongside Michael and an officer from Vallejo PD. She was pronounced dead on arrival at Kaiser Foundation Hospital at 12:38 a.m. on July 5th, 1969. They took Michael into surgery as soon as he got him to the hospital. And he told investigators that he had gotten a glimpse of the shooter's face from the side from a profile view. And he described the shooter as a man about 5'8", at least 195 pounds with a large face, very heavy set, but not blubbery fat.
That rules me out. I'm safe.
Minutes after Darlene was pronounced dead at the hospital, a man called the Vallejo Police Department from a payphone. It was 12:40 in the morning on July 5th.
I want to report a double murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you will find the kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye.
Now, remember, this is 1969. There's no recording of this call. But a police dispatcher named Nancy Slover took it down. And she noted that the substance of the statement, that's the phrase she used, was what Bob just read. She recalled that the Zodiac Killer was speaking in a rehearsed, monotone fashion, as if he was reading from a script. The park where Darlene and Michael were parked and shot was east of Vallejo, about 5 miles. Basically, if you drive out of the city, and the park is on the western edge of what looks like a whole bunch of not city area, like hills and parks and sort of this area that hasn't been built up or anything like that. Essentially a bunch of just like nothing. Now, you care to guess where the caller went to use a payphone to make that call at 12:40 a.m.?
If you're asking that question, I'm going to guess like in front of the police station.
That's actually a really good guess, and I purposely didn't put it in the notes so you wouldn't know the answer. But yeah, that's pretty close. So the payphone that he used was at the intersection of Springs Road and Tuolumne Street, and I looked up how to pronounce that, so hopefully I got it right. It was less than a mile from the Vallejo Police Department. Honestly, it was probably one of the closest payphones he could have used to where the police department was, and it gave him a spot where he could probably see them coming and going, or at least could hear the sirens. Now, man, so these murders in this town at that time, the way everything went down, the phone calls, it's bizarre. But police initially, even with the phone call, they're kind of looking at this like, this seems like revenge, right? Because this guy just comes up and does what he does, and then they kind of take this look to something you sort of foreshadowed, relationships. So they look at her current husband because she's out here with this younger guy, and her husband she's still married to is at home. So they look at him. They look at her first husband. Then they find out, being a waitress, and she's had some guys at the restaurant before you could maybe call stalkers or people who were just weird. And so they start kind of looking into all these possibilities of well, is this somebody who, is out to get Darlene for whatever reason?
Yeah,
But
but if the dude making the call said, I also killed those kids last year, I mean, that could be maybe the current husband or an ex-husband trying to throw him off, but you got to follow that lead anyway and see if there's any juice to it.
that's fair. That's fair. I think potentially, I also killed those kids last year. Maybe I think they probably had an idea what he was talking about.
Right,
But
first, let's see if any kids were killed last year. If you're in a big
Yeah.
department, if you're in a small department, you'd know.
yeah.
Oh, them.
Right, right. Well, they didn't have to wait too long before things became a little bit clearer than what they were even from the phone call. On August 1st, 1969, 3 letters supposedly written by Darlene's killer were received at the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner. The letters were incredibly similar and described by a psychiatrist to have been written by, quote, someone you would expect to be brooding and isolated, which, frankly, I feel like is a phrase I've used to describe you before.
Is that what we call a recluse these days?
I think so. I don't think that they would say that like that now.
I don't brood. I isolate, but I don't brood.
Okay, that's fair. You're right. Now, the author took credit not only for shooting Darlene and Michael, but also a shooting at Lake Herman Road a few days before Christmas 1968. A young couple, and I mean young, high school students, were out on their first official date when they were shot and murdered in a Lover's Lane area along Lake Herman Road in Benicia, California. Yeah, any thoughts about that, Bob?
Well, I think that's just terrible. I mean, again, like we said, first let's make sure this is legit, which I'm guessing it was.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, we probably wouldn't even be talking about it. But now, okay, what do we got from that murder that we can piece together with whatever we got from this one that'll help fill in the blanks and narrow down who might be behind this nonsense?
You got any thoughts about the sort of some of the similarities? Because when I was reviewing this, it jumped out to me really big time.
It's couples, Lover's Lane. It's got me thinking Colonial Parkway.
Well, yeah, and particularly when so Michael, he gets the surgery, he survives, and so he's able to give this eyewitness account of everything that happens. But when he talks about the flashlight thing, he says, well, this guy just walked up, he didn't say anything, but the way he had the flashlight in my face, I just thought it was a cop, so I went to get my ID out. So I was reaching for my wallet, I'm pulling my wallet out, and it made me think, in those cases, we had all the wallets.
Right.
And there's, been a lot of people have thought, and for good reason, that maybe the person was impersonating a police officer. Well, here it's like, this guy wasn't even impersonating a police officer.
They just assumed by the behavior that it was a police officer.
Right.
And Michael, bless his heart, I'm glad he lived, but obviously he wasn't a car guy because up until the early 2000s, you could tell a cop car by the light pattern from the rear view mirror. You knew that could be or is not. And neither a Mustang nor a Corvair had a light pattern of a police car.
Right. That's a very good point. I thought there were some interesting similarities here with the Colonial Parkway cases. And then it also just made me wonder, if it's kind of the thing. And, maybe that guy just was Alan Wilmer Sr., who's definitely, I think, suspect number 1 now in all the cases. Maybe one of the first times he just had a flashlight out just so he could see. And then, what was it, Kathy? And, maybe she was getting her wallet out because she thinks it's a cop because she can't see what kind of car it is or whatever. And he's like, oh, well, that kind of worked, and then just rolls with it, I don't have to say, hey, I'm a cop or have flashing lights, but if I just roll up on a scene and then have a flashlight in one of these areas, people can't see me.
I don't know. I don't think Kathy would have fallen for that. She'd have known that pickup truck was not a police car. She's a smart cookie.
But that's my point. I didn't make that very clear. That's what I mean by, like, maybe he parked in such a way or out of the way or whatever that, the vehicle couldn't be seen, but then all of a sudden there's somebody walking up with a flashlight and you just think, oh, crap,
Park ranger.
Yeah, the car he must be parked somewhere else, so the car came up and I didn't see it.
That could be. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, enough about Colonial Parkways, but man, I'll be really glad when they officially solve those cases. Now I got one more little piece of information for you. So back to this guy, this cat. The author of these letters said that he was murdering victims to collect them as his personal slaves in the afterlife. And this is a theme that will continue throughout.
Well, this is helpful because we know we're dealing with a a lucid, rational person then.
Right. 'Cause
Not.
who's not collecting slaves for their afterlife.
What the?
Yes, it's bizarre. And I wonder if it's like, does he actually think that, or is this just is he just messing with them?
Well, if this is what he actually believes, then that's going to make it difficult because he's going to be very erratic and nothing he does is going to make any sense.
True, that's fair. But to what I kind of maybe I think fall a little more in the camp of, I think this was just a way to sort of stir up fear and, get people, oh my gosh, because what you said, right? If I believe that, and back then I feel like people were a little bit more, I don't know.
More likely to think
trust.
that guy believed it.
Right, yeah, well, if he said it, it must be true, not like now where we're all like,
So now they think they're dealing with a lunatic.
bingo. And so it would incite a lot more fear if you think this is somebody who, well, it's not because he knew Darlene and he was a lover scorned, it's because he's collecting souls for his, supposed or slaves for his afterlife.
Right, and I don't want to be a slave in the afterlife.
Bingo. Exactly.
I didn't know that was a thing, but okay.
Yeah, so each letter also included 1/3 of a 408 symbol cryptogram that the killer said contained his identity. The writer demanded these puzzles be printed on each paper's front page, or else he would, quote, cruise around all weekend, killing lone people in the night, then move on to kill again until I end up with 12 people over the weekend.
Okay.
So now remember, he sent each of these things to 3 different papers, and each of these papers are independent. They can do whatever they want. So the Chronicle published its third of the cryptogram on page 4 of the next day's edition. An article printed alongside the code quoted Vallejo Police Chief Jack E. as saying, quote, "We're not satisfied that the letter was written by the murderer," and requested that the writer sent a second letter with more facts to prove his identity, which really, that's pretty smart. Let's confirm that this isn't just some nut job who knows a little bit, but let's make sure this is actually the guy.
Right, and the more we get him to talk, the better chance we got of figuring out who he is.
Absolutely. So the writer didn't go on the as-promised killing spree, but all 3 parts of the cryptogram were eventually published, although not on the front pages. On August 4th, the Examiner received a letter that now infamously began,
Dear editor, this is the Zodiac speaking.
and this was the first time that the writer and apparent killer used the name Zodiac. This letter responded to the police chief's request for more detailed information to prove that the author was also, in fact, this killer. The writer obliged the request, delighting in the details and writing about the murders, things that the public had not heard yet, that simply could not have been known by somebody else. Interestingly, the police wouldn't crack the code from that cipher that's often referred to as the Z408 for Zodiac 408 characters. Although the FBI and the CIA were trying to break this one, within about a week, North Salinas schoolteacher Donald Hardin and his wife Betty contacted the San Francisco Chronicle with their solution. And Betty is credited with discovering 2 cribs, which are words or phrases that are suspected to appear in the message. My understanding of this stuff, which is pretty fascinating, is that that's a kind of a powerful tool, because once you have that, you're able to sort of create more substitutions, and then you can more quickly unravel this message. So what Betty thought, this is a very smart woman, she was inspired by this killer's obvious craving for attention. So go Betty. She guessed that the message would begin with the word I, and she also thought that the word kill or killing, or even the phrase I like killing, would appear somewhere in the message, and all of her guesses turned out to be correct.
Damn, that is smart.
So, I mean, they should have just hired Betty to work on this case, man. I'm telling you.
Right?
So, despite the writer claiming that his identity would be learned by cracking the code, this deciphered Z408 text said that he would not give away his identity because it would slow down or stop his slave collection. Now, although the Z408 only took about 20 or so hours from this husband and wife team to solve, Zodiac's next cipher stumped everybody, literally everybody, for 51 years, until December 2020.
Oh, that makes sense.
What?
Well, the thing finally got solved whenever the world shut down. We're all doing puzzles all day and going crazy.
Yeah, that's fair. So the FBI announced that the Z340 had finally been cracked, but it wasn't by professional law enforcement or the NSA or any of these other folks who you might expect to be able to do it. Instead, a team of sleuths decoded the cipher. David Oranchak, and I'm sorry, I probably just said your name wrong, who was a software developer in Virginia. Sam Blake, who's an applied mathematician in Australia. And Jarl Van Ecke, I'm really sorry, a warehouse operator and computer programmer in Belgium. Part of the team that figured out a way to crack this thing. So you got, a software developer, a math guy, and a computer programmer worked together, used computers, and they were able to solve it. And they discovered that the text apparently reads the following.
I hope you're having lots of fun and trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show, which brings up a point about me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner, because I now have enough slaves to work for me where everyone else has nothing when they reach paradise, so they are afraid of death. I am not afraid because I know that my new life will be an easy one in paradise death. I'm sorry, but that's riddled with misspellings, and there's 0 punctuation. So I did the best I could with it.
Yeah, no, I understand. You did great. So one of the things that I'm sure threw Bob off is paradise is spelled Paradice.
Yeah, like a paradise.
Like a paradise, yeah. So there are some interesting things for a guy who is apparently incredibly good at codes and stuff. And in his letters and in the cryptograms, there were some interestingly misspelled words, things that you just, I don't know, I wouldn't expect to be misspelled, particularly from somebody who seems so smart. Now, he sent a couple of, short ciphers after this. One, the Z13, which has 13 characters, is so short that it's difficult to know what the correct answer is. The puzzle followed the words, my name is. And so, obviously, this was a big taunt because allegedly he was saying, well, if you can solve this one, you know my name. But he'd done this before and not given up his name. One scholar thinks the answer to the Z13 is Alfred E. Newman. Ring a bell?
Well, when you said it that it started with the words "my name is," I thought it should be Slim Shady, but obviously it's not that. Newman, isn't that the guy that makes the salad dressing?
Yeah, if it's N-E-W, that is the salad dressing guy. I wasn't sure if this would ring a bell with you or not. So Alfred E. Newman is the mascot for the Mad magazine. You know, the little character dude with the freckles and like the kind of funny face and all that.
Yeah, okay, that's funny.
Right. So
that seems like something this dude would do.
Yeah, exactly. And that's pretty much the scholar that I read who's like a math professor, genius dude, way over my pay grade. Apparently this name works for the cryptogram, and it is one of the possible solutions, and given this guy's kind of weird, twisted sense of humor, it just seems to fit. So I can already see that Bob's got this look on his face that says, I am not doing another multi-parter like John Benet Ramsey's case. So even though this intelligent nut job who liked to call himself the Zodiac went on and murdered at least 5 people and maybe as many as 37 or more, and there are literally entire websites and documentary series, podcasts dedicated to this case, I promised him I would keep this limited to 1 episode.
That's right.
So who is the man who calls himself the Zodiac? That question has plagued investigators and persisted for decades. This dirtbag has gotten away with his crimes for over half a century. Literally longer than Bob's been alive. That's ridiculous.
Right.
Now, a guy who was a cartoonist at the San Francisco Chronicle, yeah, you heard me correctly, cartoonist, wrote a book claiming that a man named Arthur Lee Allen was the Zodiac. The 2007 movie called Zodiac, I think it stars Jake Gyllenhaal, is based off of this book. The book literally sold millions of copies despite the police never being able to charge Allen or find any evidence, even after serving multiple search warrants, to actually tie him to the crimes.
Well, then how'd this guy that wrote the book, and I guess he becomes an author after he writes the book, he's not just a cartoonist. Not that that's a justa, because I can't draw cartoons unless they're stick figures. Anyway, what made this guy think that Allen was the dude?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are definitely some really odd and interesting tidbits about Allen. There's some dates and places that line up, like he's in the right town at the right time in all these different areas. There's also the fact that I believe he had a watch that was a Zodiac brand watch.
That's it. Case closed.
Right. I mean, this is what we're talking about. So it's like that kind of stuff where, sure, it's interesting and the police need to shake it down, chase it down. But here's the deal, man. This book would be like if you or I did a bunch of research and then just said, okay, we're going to write a book and say this guy did it, and here's everything we found that could possibly inculpate that person. And so people read it and they're like, oh, well, yeah, obviously it's got to be this guy. I mean, don't get me wrong. I can't sit here and tell you this guy isn't the dirtbag, but I'm not convinced. According to USA Today, Allen was institutionalized for sexually abusing children in 1975. He's never officially identified as the Zodiac Killer, but he was the only person who was ever named as a person of interest by the police. Now, that arrest and institutionalization in 75 is somewhat relevant because when we get into those places and times, given the time span that the Zodiac was active and doing what he was doing and then, sending letters and things, some people speculate that this lines up with when he quit sending correspondence, and so something must have happened. He must have, been incarcerated, or he must have went on a vacation or died or whatever. I'm not so thoroughly convinced. And frankly, I also don't know that it really lines up that a guy who was an elementary school teacher and, molested children, just given everything that I know about this case and this guy, I'm not sure that it completely lines up. Interesting dude, definitely needed to be ruled out by the police. But it's worth pointing out that they were never able to charge him. They served multiple search warrants. This guy was under intense scrutiny his whole life because that book originally came out in the 80s. I think it was like 86. But it's also worth noting that Allen died at the age of 58. He died of
arteriosclerotic heart disease.
Thank you. And it's my understanding that he died within a year of the first search warrant being executed on his house. And when he died, they actually found a form related to him taking another polygraph that was in his printer because the police had been sort of hounding him to take another polygraph exam. So, in one of the coverage I listened to or read about this case, it talked about how this guy, not that the police killed him, but that sort of this intense scrutiny of like, you are the Zodiac that weighed on him for all those years probably didn't help his heart condition any and might have certainly led to some of the, stress in his life.
Yeah, I was going to say just that. Yeah, that could add stress, I guess.
Now, I don't want to paint this rosy picture of this guy because, like I said, he was a convicted child molester. And my understanding is, I think that from some of the interviews and things of maybe people he knew and people who knew him, it sounds like there were some points where he kind of didn't mind the attention that he got as like early on as, oh, well, man, this guy, because the deal is whoever this is, they sort of knew this is a smart dude. This guy, could do all these things. But maybe he didn't realize just how far that was going to go. And
maybe he'd rather be known as a serial killer than a kitty diddler.
That's an excellent point, Bob. That's a really good point.
They should have had him. What did that one guy say? Eating hot rocks in hell.
Yes, sucking on a hot rock in Michigan, though. You said that's a place in Michigan, so.
Yeah, hell, Michigan is a place, but no, I mean the real hell for this guy.
I knew what you meant. But yeah, so Arthur Lee Allen, he's sort of like the number one guy that always comes up whenever you search this stuff. The movie that, the Hollywood movie that came out portrays it like he's the guy. There's this New York Times best-selling book that's sold millions of copies that the cartoonist wrote, who is now an author, which, don't get me wrong, I'm sure he did tons of research and whatever. That's great. I'm not saying his book sucks. I've never read his book. I don't care to.
Sounds like a lot of theory, but no, proof.
That's my problem. And at the end of the day, there was nothing, there were some things when the police really looked into this guy where it was like, he would essentially have to have planted fake evidence that wasn't his stuff in order for them to conclude that he did it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because there was some evidence at some of these scenes they were able to get that when they compared it, it's like, oh, well, it doesn't match up. And so then the response from the people who think he did it is, well, this guy's a genius. So he just planted all this fake evidence from other people so to throw people off of his trail, which, yeah, I don't know, maybe, but that's a bridge too far for me. Now, there's another book, The Most Dangerous Animal of All, which also has a short documentary type series attached to it of the same name that's streaming. And that book claims that Earl Van Best Jr. is the Zodiac Killer. And the author of the book is Van Best's son.
Damn, son.
Yeah, and talk about some daddy issues. So the documentary more or less follows this guy's pursuit of who his dad was, because he didn't know his dad. It's a sad story, and I really feel for the son. But that's not the point of this podcast.
Yeah,
so,
lots of dads go to get the milk and never come back.
that's you kind of hit the nail on the head there. So ultimately, though, the documentary people, they're kind of like in to check out this dude's story and maybe the whatever, and then they're kind of like, yeah, along the way, it really couldn't be your dad because XYZ. And I don't want to spoil all that. You can watch the documentary if you want, but basically, through the documentary, you can kind of see that some things don't add up, and you got to take some really long leaps to figure out that this guy, Van Best, could be the Zodiac. And the best thing the son has is, well, he looks like the guy in the police sketch. Well, okay.
Oh, well, case closed.
White dude with glasses, and looks pretty pedestrian. I mean, you just described half of California in that time period. So whatever. Now, in 2021, Case Breakers, which is this independent investigative group that's made up of like former law enforcement officials, academics, journalists, and some military intelligence people, they announced that they had cracked one of the most famous cold cases in history. They claim that a guy named Gary Poste, or Posty, it's Poste. I like saying Posty in my mind when I read this. Not like Post Malone, but, Posty, is the killer. They based their claims on DNA evidence found at the scene of Sherry Jo Bates' murder in 1966, which they say matches Post.
Wait, wasn't the first murder of the Zodiac supposed to be like Christmas 68?
Ah, therein lies the rub. Police are not convinced that the Bates murder is confirmed victim of the Zodiac. They've also said that Post is not a current suspect in the case. It's also worth pointing out that Post died in 2018. Now, Case Breakers, they'll point out that Post's shoe size and unique forehead scars align with evidence from the Zodiac. And they say that the letters sent to the press also contain anagrams of Post's name.
Yeah, but how many other names do they contain anagrams of?
There's a reason this case isn't solved. I'll just say that.
Right.
In 2022, Jarrett Kobek published How to Find Zodiac. And he argues that a man named Paul Dewar is a suspect that the police should take a long look at. Although this one's a bit newer, and so there's a little bit less that I could find out there than some of these other ones that have been around for, 40 years. There are definitely some interesting points made about the possibility that Dewar did it. Without hard evidence, though, it's little more than a guessing game at this point. Again, I don't have a ton on that one, but there were just some interesting things, and I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, that Kobek pointed out that, people need to take a long look at. One last theory that I'll leave you with is that the Zodiac Killer is a myth.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, there's actually a streaming series for this one. I tried to watch it. It was difficult for me. The proponents of this theory claim that each one of these crimes is just so different that there's no way they were committed by the same person.
Oh, okay. So they aren't claiming that the murders never happened, just that it's not a single person.
Right. So they say the idea of this single Zodiac Killer, that's not... That's
okay, well, that's easier to swallow than the murders never happened.
Yeah, this isn't like a, alien
moon landing thing.
Right. So I don't want to get too deep into this theory because honestly, I just don't follow it. I think there's too much to connect the crimes that investigators have designated as confirmed, which again, that's limited. It's only like 5. For me to think that this is just a myth and it's actually a string of crimes committed by different people or multiple people together or whatever, or that the crimes were committed and then these letters were sent by other people for other reasons. There's too much that ties the official Zodiac crimes together for me to believe that that's not somebody who is this person that generally I think, whether you think it's, Arthur Lee Allen or you think it's this guy or you don't know who it is or whatever, most people would agree that it's one person who did, the bulk of or all of the confirmed cases.
Okay.
Now I want to switch gears from guys who could have been the Zodiac to a guy who spent a lot of time trying to catch the Zodiac. I don't think we could do this particular episode justice without talking about a guy named Dave Toschi. Toschi was homicide at San Francisco PD, and this guy was like the guy.
What do you mean, the guy?
You heard of Dirty Harry?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so Harry, played by Clint Eastwood, was supposedly modeled on Toschi, while the villain Scorpio was based on the Zodiac Killer. Steve McQueen specifically copied Toschi's distinctive style of quick draw shoulder holster. Oh man, say that 5 times fast. Wearing his gun upside down for the 1968 movie Bullet. McQueen also claimed that he modeled a lot of his character in that off of Toschi. Now, the San Francisco Chronicle crime reporter Duffy Jennings has written, however, that while the film characters drew their swagger and style from Toschi's personal character, his professional style was by the book, efficient, and thorough. So this dude is like cop's cop, right? He served in the Army. I believe he spent some time in the Korean War. He gets out and he joins San Francisco Police Department in 1953. And then he got started in homicide in 66 and was the chief investigator on the Zodiac case. He was well known for the way he dressed, including bow ties, loud plaid suits, curly hair, and an exaggerated trench coat, all during a time period when most of the detectives and investigators were trying to look
Boring as hell.
Yeah.
Like, what Hoover wanted. But it sounds like this guy was like the architect, the archetype for the detective in movies and books from that point for decades on.
Yeah, I mean, this guy is like trendsetter of trendsetters. And, as a guy who really kind of rocketed up, was working homicide, worked a ton of cases. I mean, from everything I got, very impressive all the way around. So he had this flair about him, but it wasn't like he had flair and he couldn't solve cases. He's out there, solving homicides, looking fly while he's doing it, and kind of going against the grain and setting this precedent that, like you said, would become sort of entrenched in pop culture. And then eventually, it's sort of like art imitates life, life imitates art. It's like one of those kind of situations.
Right.
But unfortunately, in 1976, Toschi's desire for attention led him to send anonymous letters admiring his own efforts to a writer for the San Francisco Chronicle.
Nice.
And when that was learned by the SFPD brass, he was removed from the Zodiac case in 1978, and he got reassigned to the pawn robbery division.
Oh, I'm sure he was thrilled about that.
Man, could you imagine going from being this you got Steve McQueen and Clint Eastwood making their characters off of you, and then you get busted down to pawn robbery.
Yeah, no, that would... But I mean, by this time, he's got, 23 years in or something? It ought to be time to retire and go write a book.
Oh, well, to make matters worse, Toschi was also accused of writing one of the later Zodiac letters.
Oh!
Yeah. Now, the USPS crime lab verified this letter is authentic, but then later other experts disagreed and, whatever. So once these suspicions made an appearance, regardless of whether they were true or not, Toschi's chance of eventually becoming the chief of the San Francisco Police Department were gone. And so I think that was a very realistic thing for him.
Hey, as a guy who's been there, it ain't all it's cracked up to be, just saying.
Well, you talking about pretending to be the Zodiac, or?
No, being the chief. But being the damn Zodiac sounds pretty friggin' terrible, too.
I mean, that's fair. All right, well, just to wrap some things up, the last confirmed Zodiac murder took place on October 11th, 1969, with the murder of cab driver Paul Stein.
Wait, so this dude is out here shooting folks in the face and murdering cab drivers and kills a half a dozen people in a year and then just stops?
Yeah, this is an interesting point because nobody knows, right? Again, I said that's the last confirmed. We have no question. And the reason we have no question that he murdered Paul Stein is afterward when police were kind of like, is it him? Is it not him? This isn't a couple. It's in San Francisco. It's in the city. It's a guy who was riding with a cab driver and then murdered him. But Zodiac sends a letter signing it off as Zodiac with a piece of Paul Stein's bloody clothing to prove I killed this guy.
Oh.
So there's no question that's who was responsible. But it does leave us with the question of, why does it stop? Did he move? Did he die? Did he go to prison for some other unrelated thing? Or is it, as some have speculated, that he stopped because it wasn't the killing that he was obsessed with? He was obsessed with... This theory sounds a little weird at first, but it's got support, even by FBI profiler John Douglas, who said...
Every story that's ever been written about him, he would have his own personal diaries where he's communicating to himself.
And Douglas argues that there are cases where serial killers suddenly stop killing because they're able to relive that moment again and again.
They would just go back into the fantasy, just sit back in that lazy boy chair and pull out the scrapbook and think of your memories and what you did, and that's enough for them to get through.
So did this creep get what he needed and stop? Did he find some other outlet for this power trip that he was on, like BTK? Did he get run over by a bus? Until we figure out who he is, we really won't know the answer. You got anything else to add?
No, other than he sounds, whoever the Zodiac is, and this detective Toshi sound like they're cut from the same cloth.
Are you saying Toski is the Zodiac?
Well, I'm guessing that he was thoroughly ruled out, and therefore I just leave it at they have a lot in common.
It's kind of interesting. I don't know that I've seen that theory.
Look at the desire for fame.
The attention blankism. Yeah. That's interesting.
Not just the desire for fame. It sounds like a need for fame.
I never saw anybody even talk about whether that was a possibility, but that's interesting.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with us on the Brothers in Crime podcast. Feedback and suggestions are always welcome. For links and resources related to this episode, please see the show notes or visit us at brothersincrimepodcast.com. We hope you'll save, subscribe, or bookmark us on your favorite podcast site and join us for the next episode.